Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you all for coming. I'm Jesse Shelburne. I'm the student president of the Institute of Politics. Thank you all for joining us here tonight for the official launch of Joe and Mika's IOP fellowships. Before I turn you over to the director of the Institute of Politics, I have a few announcements. We encourage you to live tweet tonight's program with the hashtag Joe and Mika go to Harvard. The Wi-Fi network, if you haven't seen already, is National Archives of One. Also, some of you may know that our moderator, David Rubenstein, owns some of the most important documents in both American and world history, including the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Independence. After we hear from Joe and Mika, David will offer a brief overview of those documents at the reception, and we hope you'll take a first-hand look in the nearby gallery. And now it is my honor to introduce Acting Director of the Institute of Politics, Congressman Bill Delahunt.
Well, thank you, Jesse. You could have been a little more generous in the description. I'm just teasing. I'm trying to get the crowd to lighten up. This is truly an impressive turnout. And sincerely, it's encouraging to see the students from Harvard, from all over the country here. It's, I guess, a moment in our history where the question is, where are young people these days as far as the political process is concerned? Well, look at this. This is truly, as I said, truly impressive. And as Jesse indicated, this is the first in a series of events where our newest IOP fellows, Joe and Mika, will share their insights and observations about the current state of American politics. And we're particularly fortunate to have as our moderator David Rubenstein, who had and continues to have a exceptional and extraordinary career in public service and a very successful career in business, and now has discovered a new career at this point in his life, and he's a talk show host on Bloomberg, so make sure you listen and learn. The format, as Jesse indicated, David will be asking questions in a conversation, then we'll turn it over to students. Let me introduce Mika Brzezinski. She brings thoughtfulness and respect, along with grace and dignity, to her role as one of the most influential TV hosts in the United States today. Unfortunately, those qualities, grace and dignity, seem to be somewhat rare in our public discourse. She brings so much that I think it's time that MSNBC think about and give serious consideration to renaming the program to Good Morning Mika and her friend Joe. I thought that would get a line. And of course, there's Joe Scarborough. I served with Joe in Congress back in the day. We were pals. He was a dear friend. We had a lot of laughs, and yet we did some things together. And there's a lot of stories I could tell, but I'm not going to tell them. But let me say this about Joe Scarborough. Everyone respected Joe Scarborough. He listened. He was a fierce advocate. He could be tough, but he knew how to work with other people. And I'll say this, too. What I think impressed me about him was that he had courage. He had courage to speak truth to power. He didn't necessarily follow the party line. He spoke out at times when it was clear from our side of the aisle that it wasn't particularly welcomed by the then Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. But that quality of speaking truth to power is something that really is a core value that Joe brings everywhere he goes. And that's why the ratings are taking off between Joe and Mika. So come on out and give them a rousing round of applause.
Thank you so much. That was generous.
I've never met that man before. He made all of that up.
Have a seat.
I am.
So, thank you very much for coming. I watched you this morning, and to do that show, you must get up at 4 a.m. or something like that. So you haven't had any time off since then? You're just...
No, we're actually sort of...
You're on a lot of
We're
coffee
asleep right now, yeah.
Okay. So, anything new we should talk about, or no?
No, this is going to be, we're going to have to really dig deep.
Well, let's start by, you were a member of Congress. You had served 3 terms.
Right.
What did you think about the role of being a member of Congress? Why did you leave after 3 terms, and why did you say, I want to do something else?
Well, as far as the role of Congress goes, and it's always been my view with Washington, I've always said, and you see it in Washington, all the world's a stage. And everybody, at least when I was there, I think understood what their role was. I was, like Bill said, I was a younger member. I was 30 when I ran and got elected. And was a backbencher, but was constantly pushing my own party, and so it was. It's interesting. After I got out of Congress, I always had people come up to me and said, "Boy, I bet that was tough. I bet you're glad to be out of that." And I always said the same thing. I said, "No." I said, "It was the greatest job I've ever had in my life. I absolutely loved it," and it's so interesting. It's like everything else. You all are so young, all of you. But it wasn't until I really left that I understood the most important part of my job, because I was very ideological. We were always trying to, we were always fighting to balance the budget, and we would do anything to balance the budget. We made some really unpopular moves that I thought were the right moves to make, as far as reforming Medicare and doing other things. But it wasn't until I left and I would be going back home to Pensacola, people would come up to me 5 years later and they'd grab me by the arm and they'd say, "Hey, my mom had died and I was out of the country and I couldn't get a hold of the State Department and they weren't letting me get back in for the funeral." Or somebody else would say, "We had a farm in the northern part of your district, and the IRS had been auditing us for 5 years. And when you called them up," and I remember I called somebody and said, "Listen, if they've done something wrong, go out and arrest them. If they haven't, you need to get off their property and let them do their job." It was things like that, helping people with Social Security checks, helping vets. Those were the things that I didn't see as an ideological kid that was actually having a great impact on people's life, but it did.
When you left, did you know what you wanted to do? Did you say, "You know what, I really shouldn't be a member of Congress, I should be a TV show host"? Did you know that? Did that what you thought?
I am ashamed to say that I left. I ran, like I said, when I was young. I had young kids. They were 7 and 4. And after 6, 7 years there, they were in middle school. So I had to come home. Because I was away 200 nights a year. And so I came home and I coached baseball and I took my kids to school and practiced law for a year or two. But I did say, when I left, somebody said, "What do you like to do?" I said, "Well," just nonchalant, "Well, I'd like to do a TV show maybe." And, Jeb Bush called me up and said, "Oh, that's nice. Well, I'd like to be a baseball player." And somehow, in a weird way, it all just things sort of fell into place.
Now, Mika, your father worked in the White House with me. He was National Security Advisor when I was in the White House, and very distinguished. And obviously, the country mourns his loss. He was a terrific public servant, and was the adult in the White House when I served there. How come his daughter didn't say, "I want to go into foreign policy and I want to go be a national security advisor"? How did you get into the TV world?
I'm the black sheep. Both my brothers followed in his footsteps. There's Ian, the Republican, who worked for the Bush administration.
And Ian, by the way, is so Republican. I can say that now as an independent. He is such a neocon that if you gave the guy 3 tanks, he would invade Canada.
He absolutely would. And then my other brother, Mark, was ambassador to Sweden and worked in the Obama administration. And they both went to graduate school and Fulbright scholars and served in the Army, and they were perfect. And then I think it all started with the fact that I was an accident. And so they didn't really.
We don't have to
expect
go
have
that
a
far
third
back.
child. But so they didn't have a lot of time. But I would go with my dad to the White House, and I would go to watch him do Meet the Press, and I would watch him do Nightline, and watch reporters come to our home and set up and do interviews and watch the news at night and try and figure out how they chose that sound bite. And I became fascinated, really, at, I believe, 10 years old with journalism and television news and local news. I started working in local newsrooms when I was 15, 16 years old. I worked on the overnight shift at Channel 9. I knew what I wanted to do at a very young age.
Okay.
And unfortunately, that was not exactly what he planned when he took me along on all those interviews. I think he thought I was listening to his fascinating statements.
So his name was one that many people couldn't spell and some couldn't pronounce, but now you are so well known, you don't need to have a last name, right? You just use Mika, right?
Oh, like Madonna.
Right,
Yes,
it's
exactly.
the same thing. You and Cher, the same thing.
Iman, yeah.
Right. So how did you actually get started? How did you actually get started? You got a show a few years ago before you did the show together. But you had your own show for a while. Is that right?
Well, if you asked the president of MSNBC, he would say he discovered Joe, and that Joe was on the beach in Pensacola, like with one of those things to find pieces of metal, and that it was really
Del
all
Hunt
Phil.
likes that joke.
Okay, Phil Griffin.
So he called me up. It's so funny. I was practicing law and hating every second of it. And Phil called me up and said, "Hey, would you like a TV show?"
He served as, he came on these shows as a guest.
I'd come on the
Okay.
shows as a guest. And I said, "Sure." I mean, it beats practicing
So
law.
did you get training about how to do this as a host?
No,
Or no training?
No, it's so funny.
that's never how it
Everybody
works.
that they brought into MSNBC, I found out later they'd give them like 6 months and they'd have rehearsals and everything. They actually just pushed me on and said, "Have you ever read teleprompter before?" I said, "No," and said, "Okay, you'll be fine."
Okay.
I've got to say, I've done a lot of things. I've coached football. I've written a musical. I've done all of these things in my life and sort of just done them. It was like the single most horrifying thing I've ever done
very.
before. I mean, it was just going from where you had control of everything and you would write your notes down to suddenly they put you on in front of a camera and they stick something in their ear. You've got bright lights in your face, and you're reading teleprompter, and there are all these people talking into your ear, and you have no idea who they are. That
was your first show.
That's the first
And
show.
then when did your show come together? When did that first start?
10 years ago.
10 years
We're
ago.
the longest running anchor team on television, including Willie, the three of us.
The three of us.
Unprecedented.
So who brought the two of you together? How did you decide, well, she's going to be my partner on this show?
Well, Phil called me up, and they had all their ideas. Imus had just gotten in trouble for talking about women's basketball. And they said, they decided I'd be on the show, but they kept talking about all of these co-hosts, and it just didn't really fit the
I'm
mold.
not sure the people in this room even know
No,
who
they're
Don
too young
Imus
to know who
is.
Don
Do you
Imus
guys?
is.
Oh, my God.
Della
We are
Hunt
so
remembers.
old.
Yeah, I know.
So there was this guy who was on
No, we don't have
MSNBC.
to go into it.
And he was like a radio host, like that. And
So anyway.
he did this show for 3 hours, and it made a lot of money for MSNBC. And he said something incredibly racist and got kicked off the air. And so there was a 3-hour hole in the morning on MSNBC that they needed to fill with something that might make some money for the network. And that's
Okay.
where you come in.
So all right, so you started the show 10 years. 10
So
years ago.
so they went ahead and they didn't want me to do it, and they kept trying all these other people and nothing worked. So finally Memorial Day weekend came along and nobody wanted to do it on the Friday and Monday. I said, I'll do it. And actually on the Friday before Memorial Day weekend, did it, and about 1 hour into it, Tom Brokaw walked into Phil Griffin's office and he looked up at the TV screen, he looked down at Phil, he looked up at the TV screen, and he looked down at Phil and he said, Scarborough, who knew? And walked out. And Phil said, "Well, maybe I should hire him." But they didn't. They didn't get Mika at first, and wanted to try all these different people. But she worked, and she worked really well. And I knew it from the second I met her. The night before I was going to go on the first time, I met her in the newsroom, and she had been doing cut-ins for me for the show, which was called, I'm ashamed to say, Scarborough Country. Phil's idea, not mine. And so she would come in at the half hour, and she'd do 1 minute news read. And she'd always go, and now back to Scarborough Country.
Okay.
And I was down in Florida, because I had my kids down in Florida, and this was the great American scam. I was doing my show from Pensacola, Florida. I'd go out on the boat in the day, and then I'd go on TV at night at 9 o'clock. I was coaching baseball, and I'd wave my arms for an hour, being shocked and stunned and deeply saddened at what was going on. But Mika would always do this cut-in. And the show went on for like a year. I'd never met Mika, so I go up in the newsroom, and I see her, I go, "Oh, Mika Brzezinski, how are you? It's so funny. I've been on the show for a year. I've never met you. Great to meet you." And she goes, "Good to meet you, too." And I said, "I want you to know that my friends have told me that you're making fun of my show." Because I would go on the boat, and my friends would go, "Dude, I think that blonde woman's making fun of your show." Mika's response was immediate. She said, "How could I make fun of a show that I've never even seen?" True story. I called Phil Griffin,
And you said-
and I said, "Phil, we have found our co-host."
Okay. All right. So when you started the show and together, at what point did you realize that a lot of people who were influential were watching the show, and while the ratings of the Today Show might be higher in terms of number of people watching, you have people who are talking to the President of the United States or doing other great things. When did you first realize?
Well, that's the funny thing, because he was all preparing to to create this show, and had like a board that he made for Phil with blocks of the types of people he'd have in, the types of conversations, and he planned it all in his mind. And he got out there, and he was a little more on edge about it. 5 minutes in, I knew that this was going to be a huge success. And I told him, I'm like, "Calm down. This is going to be a long ride. This is going to be good. This is going to be the best thing that's ever happened on television." And he looked at me like, "How do you know that?" And I just could tell when that red light went on. First of all, we never stopped talking. We were talking off the air, the three of us, and our EP as well. And we just kept talking on the air, and we did what we wanted. And we broke all the rules of television
Right.
immediately. And for me, I had been in television for about 20 years, and I had done everything: magazine shows, 60 Minutes, morning shows. I was the anchor of the weekend news before I was fired from CBS News Network. I'd done 10 years in local news. I literally have done every type of television show known to man, and every single one is the same. And you're always sort of filling someone else who's done it. Dan Rather's shoes, Katie Couric's shoes, Leslie Stahl's shoes, Mike Wallace's shoes. You're always kind of fitting a formula that's already been created. Here we were breaking the mold.
Okay.
And I knew that this was going to be an explosion.
So, by the way, Joe, I know sometimes on TV you wear a tie, you wear different things. Now I see you're wearing a suit, but you don't have any socks on. Is that a customary thing, or?
It's an Alabama thing, Roll Tide. No, I don't know.
All right. Well, you can.
It's so funny when I first got on set and wasn't wearing socks, everybody
I
was
have
like,
some.
"Why aren't you wearing socks?
you
You're
do.
wearing socks, good, yeah."
Aren't you hot?
But yeah,
Well,
it became fashionable.
Okay.
For a while, it's just like my Stan Smiths, which I've been wearing for 50 years. You know, kids started
so
wearing
when,
about a
when
year
you're
or two
doing
ago.
the show, at some point, somebody would call in, let's say name is Donald Trump.
Right.
He would call in, and did you ever think...
Or his
in-
special friend,
or
Jeff
special,
Miller.
yes.
Yeah.
They would call in. Did you ever think...
John Miller.
Do you ever think that John Miller or Donald Trump would become president of the United States in your wildest dreams?
Yes.
No.
I
I did
did.
not. I got to say, let's go back.
Don't
Okay.
just mistake that with supporting him.
Okay.
Hold on a second. Let's go back though, Mika, because Willie Geist and I would actually have this joke between us. And Donald would get off because he was doing The Apprentice. This week we were like the #1 rated show in the galaxy. And they'd be like number 17 that night. And Willie Geist and I had this running joke. And he'd get off the show and I'd go, "Willie, it was amazing to have Donald." And Willie would go, "Yes. You know, a lot of people are calling him the Abraham Lincoln of our time." And I go, "Yes, Abraham." And so that became sort of a running joke. It was like in 2011. Just having fun with it and not thinking it'd ever run for anything. But the second he came down the escalator in June of 15, that's when Mika told a lot of people around the set that were all laughing, said this guy could win.
So when he was running for a while, it seemed to some people that you had a reasonably favorable view of him in the sense you thought people shouldn't discount him.
Right.
And so your view was he did have a chance of winning.
No,
Is that fair?
No, you know what? Actually, what our view was that he could win. That's not a favorable view. That's a
Favorable view of his
realistic
chances of
view.
winning.
Favorable view of his chances,
You
yeah.
had a
Yeah.
favorable view of his chance of winning.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So did he call you up from time to time, not on the show, and just say, "What do you think?" or get any advice from me, or what kind of relationship
yes.
was it?
I gave him advice several times. The first time I gave him advice, I said, "Donald, you should probably apologize for that thing you said about Mexicans." He goes, "But
Before that, I think you told him to read.
well, no, that came later. That came later. But I said, you should apologize for that Mexican. But Joe, I didn't say, but it sounded like you did, Donald. You need to apologize. He ignored me. The next week, I think he insulted John McCain. I called him up. I said, you can't say that about John McCain. Then it was me. And finally, after about the fourth phone call, he said, "Thank you for your advice, Joe. I just don't apologize." And so, but there was, though, after the first debate, we did go up there and I did ask him
Okay.
if he read.
So-
I said, "Can you actually read?" And Mika
I
got,
don't think he does.
and I said, because you really need people to write you one-page policy papers, and you need to go deeper. This was early on. I still, though, I mean, we can say we thought he was going to win. We thought he had a chance. We never thought he would actually
When
be
the
president.
day of the election, most people didn't think he was going to win.
Right.
And then he did win. The next day, did he call you up and say, "See, you shouldn't have discounted me," or did you give him any
Yes, he
advice?
invited us to Trump Tower. He said, "You got to come see me. I'm president."
And did you go?
Yep.
And what was it like? Was he the same as he was before, or a little different?
He was the same. It was
Do you call
weird.
him still Donald, or?
Yes. Well, now I call him nothing. We don't talk
Oh.
at all.
Well, let's get
So,
to that.
Things
but-
have kind of devolved.
All right, so,
Yeah, just a
well,
tad.
okay.
You know,
so
though,
so you went to
that-
Trump Tower, and
but-
that was a nice meeting. And then later, you went to see him down in Mar-a-Lago. And
Before that, we had lunch at the White House.
But hold on, though. We're skipping over
Okay,
too much.
all right.
Actually, if you don't mind me stepping in for a second and grabbing hold of
Fucking-
the interview. Now, so everybody said he could not win.
right.
The last 3 weeks, we actually started saying, hold on a second. The polls were showing it was 11, 12 points, and we started saying, hold on a second. This guy could still win. 3 weeks in politics is a lifetime. And the hell we got, Mark Halperin, Mika, and myself got for saying he could win, which, by the way, is something that Harold Ford was saying at the same time, too. Harold went, actually, in your old district in Nantucket. My son got married there, and Harold, in the middle of the summer, said, Donald Trump's going to win. And so we were just a handful of people that were saying he could win. I still didn't think he was going to win. But there was a change. There was not a change so much during the transition period. We were, of course, disturbed by how erratic it was, and we had not talked to him for most of the campaign because we were so disgusted by a lot of stuff he did. But the big change really came the second he got into the White House, and we could tell it immediately.
The change being?
Well, the best way to tell you is I actually had called, I think it was Sean Spicer or Reince Priebus. It was during the day that he was about to be inaugurated, and Sean Spicer had put up pictures of the crowd sizes. And I called up Reince, and I said, Reince, I know this is y'all's first day in office, but I just want you to know, if you hold a press conference the first day of your administration lying about crowd sizes, we're going to absolutely kill you on the show, like the next day. We're going to destroy, we're going after you. That is the most reckless, irresponsible, childish thing. And you could tell they were already in a sense of panic, that he was screaming that he wanted to have this press conference. And they went ahead and did it. And I guess they told him that he better call us, that we were angry, better work us. So about 3 or 4 hours later, I got a phone call at home. And the operator said, it's the President of the United States. And I thought, oh, cool, Barack Obama's calling me at home. That's never happened. And I actually, after talking to him for about 2 minutes, I was like, okay, he's gone. Actually, I hung up the phone. I called Mika. I said, Mika, he is so taken with everything around him that he's gone. But he's not listening to anybody, and he won't listen to anybody.
But subsequent to that, he invited you to the White House for lunch?
Yep.
Right. And what was that like?
So I think had kind of a, I don't think the word's upset. He's really into Joe and concerned about
This is not true. Whatever she's saying is not
there's
true.
just kind of like he really watches our show, and I think considered it important to be considered positively.
He doesn't watch anymore.
I think of course not. No, not ever.
I never watched the show at 6:42 when Joe said this about me. It's a total lie.
I think
if you listen to what he said at 7:43, it was a little more accurate, but not as bad as what he said at 8:15.
Okay.
I think that he brought to the White House this understanding in his head that if you do something nice for someone, they will then say nice things about you back. And he found that that didn't happen with us. So it took a few months for him to realize that that's just not going to happen with us.
But if he called you today and said, look, we've had some problems, let's, get together, would you go over and have lunch or dinner with him now?
Yeah, of course we would. Would you?
Well, I haven't been invited, but...
The answer,
well,
I'm just curious.
No, the difference, I mean, the question is, because, we didn't talk, we were at war with him throughout most of the campaign, and they kept calling and saying, you need to come over, and this was like in the fall, and we were like, why? Why? I don't know that I would, and the reason I don't know that I would was because he always he thinks that if he's nice to you and invites you to lunch or dinner, that somehow you're going to give him more favorable coverage, and it always ends the same, where he's shocked and stunned.
That you're not Sean Hannity.
Actually, that's what he said. He actually called me up after lunch because Stephen Miller had gone on TV that Sunday morning. We had no idea, but earlier in the morning it had said that the president's authority was not to be questioned. And I had already been enraged by what Donald had tweeted about judicial independence. And so Monday and Tuesday, after we were in the White House on Sunday, we absolutely, I think we were tougher on Stephen Miller those 2 days than anybody. And Donald called up screaming, saying, why are you being so mean to this boy? And I said, Donald, he said that your authority was not to be questioned. We were not in Russia yet. And so it kept going on and on and on. And he finally, at one point, he screamed. He goes, I could have invited Hannity over. I know why you're doing this.
This happened.
He said, you're doing this because you think you have to show that you're independent. Just because I invited you over. Delahunt can tell you, I've been a son of a bitch for a very long time. You can't buy me with a fish dinner. But he doesn't understand that. He thinks that if he invites you somewhere to the White House, that you somehow are going to give him a break.
Do you call him still Donald when you're talking to him? You don't call him Mr. President?
Well, I haven't talked to I haven't talked to him a very long time. But no, I should call him Mr. President.
So your show's been over 10 years,
right,
and you've done very successful. Now, all of a sudden, you've become rock stars as opposed to just television stars. So how are you dealing with this increased fame and attention?
I make sure I tune my guitar every night. No, the thing is, it's
easier, harder?
It's the same thing. I mean, I think people are paying closer attention because we've known the president, Donald Trump, President Trump, there I said it. But it was the same thing with the Obama administration as far as we knew Valerie and we knew David and we were in the White House and we were talking to them. And this is not new to us. We've done this before. It's like when we went over to the White House, Donald said to Mika, we were in the Oval Office, he goes, hey, is this your first time in the Oval Office?
Oh, my God.
Mika said, no. He goes, when was the first time? She goes, when I was 9. And he goes, but Joe, I bet this is your first time here. I said, I was in Congress 20 years ago, Donald. I don't know if you knew that.
You've become rock stars in the sense tomorrow I'm doing an interview of 2 people, George W. Bush and Bill Clinton together. And more people have asked me about this interview than that. Nobody cares about that interview. They all ask about this interview. So today, why did you decide to become fellows of the Institute of Politics? You have many things you could do. Why did you pick this?
Because Alabama wouldn't accept me.
This is amazing.
Roll Tide! Joking, people.
Are you kidding me? This is incredible.
All right. But you have many opportunities. By the way, you're writing 3 books I just read.
I know.
How are you going to have time to write 3 books?
Well, they're next spring and the following fall. So
okay.
I got a little bit of time.
You have time to write? I mean, how do you have time?
I do a lot of dictating.
Okay.
And,
well,
one of them is a re-release of a book that I wrote about 5 years ago, and it's updating it.
So tell people, when you get up to do the show, you get up at 4 in the morning or something like that. Then the show starts at 6.
Right.
Then you're done at, let's say, 9.
Right.
All right.
All right. So the rest of the day you can do anything you want, or you have to go back and go to sleep to catch up on the sleep you missed when getting up.
I sort of blew through your last question. This is a great honor for us. You asked why did we want to do this? This is such a great honor for us. And it was a much bigger honor until we knew that Delahunt was involved here. I'm joking.
Okay.
No, but it's a great honor for us. I remember when Mika and I first heard that we were going to be able to do this. We were just thrilled. And we have been blessed to be able to do so many things that there aren't a lot of things that excite us, but this is a great honor for us.
Last night you made some news on TV.
Right.
So are there any news you could make today, like the date you're going to get married or something like that?
Why don't we? How about the location? Can we do that? We've got the former representative there.
No. Okay. Well,
Just tell us. We won't tell anybody. We won't tell anybody.
If Bill Delahunt will promise to go, Mika and I might. We might get married in Nantucket in the spring.
Okay, there we go. A piece of news.
Well, we don't know because we have people to talk to.
But we don't know.
Okay.
Because we got to make sure that our kids are okay with it.
All right, so there's some news.
There's some news.
Okay, so right now, as you look at...
Did I say something wrong?
No, you're good. You can zip it.
Have you ever been happier? Have you ever been happy in your life when what you're doing now? You've got all the attention, you're getting married, everything is great. What could be better?
Well, No, we're very.
You're
no,
happy.
in all seriousness, we're so lucky. I pinch myself every day. And in terms of the show that we created together, Joe came up with, I wake up every morning at 4, and I've been doing this for many years. Most of the decades that I've been in television, I've had to work horrible shifts, and I jump out of bed. It's exhausting, but the job is so much fun. It's so important. It's such a responsibility. It's such an honor, and I know how lucky I am. And that's a nice feeling to have a sense of what you have.
And your father must have been very proud of you when he watched the show?
He was, yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, he's
He was
proud.
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 Okay. Now,
He was
Very
proud,
proud.
but we do wake up at 4 and it's exhausting. But I will tell you, we do every morning. We just feel lucky that we're able to do it.
So when Trump's campaign wasn't going so well, President Trump's campaign, at one point there were stories that maybe you were thinking of running for president or the presidential nomination in the Republican Party. Were you ever thinking of getting in the race?
No,
Were
absolutely.
you ever thinking of running for Senate or governor or anything?
No.
You're out of the politics. in
No,
terms of running.
I'm out. I'm into music now.
Okay.
No.
And what about your rock band? How often do you do that?
I am into music. No,
He's releasing one EP a month,
Yeah.
about 400 songs into the middle of that right now, recording all day, every
so
day.
I don't have time to run for anything.
Okay, you're not running.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
but
Well, why don't we, just final question before we ask the students some questions. Public service. You were in public service. Your father was in public service. How do you compare the thrill of being in public service to what you're doing now? Is it a great honor? Did you enjoy it?
Well, and for anybody thinking about getting into public service, I mean this. And I said it earlier. Yes, I love being on TV, and they pay me a lot better on TV than they did when I was in Congress. I can tell you that Congress was hard. Bill can tell you. I can whine about it now, especially in Pensacola. I always had to fly every weekend through Atlanta. You'd get stuck in the airports. It was nonstop. I did 100 town hall meetings a year. I can tell you it was the greatest job I ever had because I actually felt like I was making a difference. And I saw people that got in there because they thought it would be a cool thing to do. It's not a cool thing to do. But if you believe in public service and if you believe that you can help your home and your area and your country, you need to do it. And we desperately, desperately need a lot of young people to get inspired and get involved in politics today more than ever.
Okay, well, great. So, questions? Okay. So, here, question right here? Here, then there.
Hi. So I guess my question would be, do you see,
Speak up.
or for Joe, would you see your defection from the Republican Party being more a result of the leaders of the party or just kind of the overall, I don't want to say like, I guess like their willingness to back up the presidential administration?
Well, this has been a long time coming. The question is really, did I leave the party because of Donald Trump and the leaders backing Donald Trump or for other reasons? No, this was a long time coming. Obviously, I was concerned, and I talked about it last night on the show. I was concerned about the Muslim ban. I was offended by the Muslim ban. I said there's no way I could ever vote for anybody for president in my party or any party that would ban somebody from coming into this country because of the God they worshipped. I was offended by what he said about David Duke and the Klan. I said that was disqualifying in and of itself, pretending, wrote it in the Washington Post. And there were Judge Curiel, the cons. You could go one example after another. And what bothered me the most was that the Republican Party and its leaders, so many of them had so many reasons why they didn't support Donald Trump, but I never heard that it was because he was a racist. They always would, or because what he was saying was racist, or that he was basically a political bottom feeder, that he was trying to appeal to the worst instincts in the Republican Party. I never heard that. It's just like Don Jr. meets, along with Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort, with somebody after being promised that the government, Vladimir Putin's government, wanted to collude with them. Even today on Capitol Hill, and yesterday on Capitol Hill, I heard Republicans say, when asked, would they have taken that meeting? Well, I don't want to speculate. You can speculate. You can stop with the legal niceties. It was just wrong. But it goes even beyond that. I'm a small government, I guess conservative. I'm afraid to use that word now. I'm a conservative with a small c. But we're in debt. We've got a $20 trillion debt. We've got entitlement programs that are not sustainable. They're going under. I don't care what anybody says, unless we do something to reform them. We've got to make tough choices. The Republican Party was supposed to be the party that you may not have liked. Maybe they were grumpy, but at least they would make the tough choices. This Republican Party, when I left Congress in 2001, we had a balanced budget. We had a $155 billion surplus. By the time Republicans left with George W. Bush as president and them controlling Washington for 6 of 8 years, there was $1 trillion deficit. They doubled the national debt. Of course, the national debt doubled under Barack Obama, but it's going to go up another $10 trillion under Donald Trump. There's nothing conservative about this party. And I think maybe the last straw for me actually wasn't Russia. It was a health care bill that a handful of people wrote that kicks 25 million people off of their health insurance, and then they turn around and give tax cuts to the richest 1% in America. Now, I am a conservative. I am a small government conservative. I've got no problem with people getting rich. If you're out there and you want to work hard and you want to get rich, go team. Just hire a lot of people, right? But the rich are getting richer in America, the poor are getting poorer, and the system really is rigged against working class Americans. By the way, rigged was not Donald Trump's term. I will tell you, he picked that term up from a certain morning talk show that talked about how the system is rigged for the rich against working class Americans, and you can be a Republican, and you can believe in small government, and you can believe in fiscal responsibility, and you can still believe that. But I haven't seen anybody in my party believe that. I think the health care bill is heartless, and I think the way they went about it is shameful, and they did it without any transparency, and at the end of the day, I just couldn't defend them anymore after 25 years of this.
Now, you have announced that you're an independent. Mika, have you ever announced what party you're in?
I'm a Democrat.
But you're not going to go be independent. You're a Democrat.
Good.
Okay. All right. Question right here. Good. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for being here. I'm wondering, especially in the TV news world, I always wonder, how do you mediate between the flashy and maybe less substantive but still potentially newsworthy issues from the really substantive things like healthcare or whatever? How, as hosts, do you kind of engage with all of the issues, but make sure listeners and viewers know kind of this thing is actually super important? And especially in the Trump administration, where we see so many things that seem so newsworthy all the time, how do you kind of continue to sort of say, this is an important thing that we need to be talking about?
Well, the beauty of our show is that we just do what we want to do, what we think is important, and we have pretty much complete editorial control over what we're going to talk about. And we work closely with our executive producer, Alex Gorson, right before the show, and think about really what is kind of the lead of the day. And it's us us. And that is a departure. It certainly was a departure when Morning Joe started. When Morning Joe started, we had a lot of different sort of forces feeding us what the news was. So there'd be a newscast that came our way. And we would sort of talk at the top of the show, and then we would turn to news, and the news came from kind of a different part of the building. But that blew up one morning.
That ended when they told Mika that instead of us leading with 2 Republican senators defecting from George W. Bush's Iraq policy, that they wanted Mika to read the news that Paris Hilton was getting out of prison.
She's an heiress. Do you know who Paris Hilton is?
Okay.
No, seriously, I can't tell. I'm so old.
We do have to check.
That's old news.
So you ought to look. You ought to type
She does
in.
the commercial with the hamburger.
Okay. You can Google Mika Brzezinski and Paris Hilton, and 5 million YouTube hits later, Mika tore up the script. And then the next hour, they gave her the script, and she tried to burn it. And the next hour, tried to put it through a paper shredder. And that was the last morning they tried to tell Mika what to do.
Okay.
I thought I would get fired, actually. And they were very upset with me. And I was called in to the front office. And I was actually only freelance at that point. But I was at the point in my life where I had done news, and I put that in quotes, for 20 years. And so much of it was not news. And I had fallen in line every time because I thought that my job was just to do what I was told. And the beauty of Morning Joe is that we do what we feel is important. And that's where our conversations come from. And luckily, there was such a great viewer reaction to that morning that they saved my job. Like you all saved my job.
Dr.
Your
Brzezinski,
parents.
I think Dr. Brzezinski was in Croatia at the time, saying wonderful, important things.
Yes, about world affairs.
About world affairs. And somebody actually asked about Mika tearing up the Paris Hilton script. I don't think he was especially pleased.
Okay.
I think he came on the show next week and called me stunningly superficial.
Yeah, I think he did.
So,
And the best guest you ever had on the show?
My dad.
Dr.
Okay.
Brzezinski.
That's
no,
an easy question, right?
that was an easy question, Dr. Brzezinski.
All right, who was the worst guest?
Dr. Brzezinski.
Yeah.
All right. When he called me stunningly superficial, really quickly, I do want to, this is very important, going back to this question. In the age of Trump, I think the greatest challenge is keeping everything in context, because it is so easy to get so amped up
Emotional.
about every shocking thing that is said. And that's actually just playing, we figured this out finally, that's playing right into his hands. He wants you to be angry.
Yeah.
He wants you to be shocked and stunned. What he doesn't want is for you to take a step back and actually understand what he's
Or
doing.
laugh.
Or laugh at him.
One more question we have over here. Right, one over here on this side. Here's somebody right here.
So
Well-
this is a party-leaning question as well. So do you encourage other Republicans who may be as disaffected for a variety of reasons with the Republican Party to follow you out? Or do you think that there's some possibility of exerting some leverage inside the party to move it in a more favorable direction by identifying itself as a resistant faction, if you will, and exercising some influence on perhaps the Republican Party, perhaps the Democratic Party, or do you think independence is the way to go?
Well, I think that's up to the individual. If you look at what's happened in France, I think that's coming our way sooner rather than later. We've had a 150-year duopoly between the Republican and Democratic Party. As John Meacham points out, that's unprecedented in world history, that two parties have complete control over a system. If people think they can reform the Republican Party from within, that's fine. But what frustrates me so much with not only members that I talk to in Congress, but donors, activists, everybody else, they are resigned to the fact that Donald Trump is a bad actor and they can do nothing about that. I've had member after member well, he's just Donald. We can't We can't do anything about it. I've had some of the most powerful donors say, well, he's not going to change. He's not going to. We said this on the air publicly when Paul Ryan endorsed Donald Trump. We said, you've made a huge mistake. If you're going to give him your endorsement, you have to get something back for it. You have to push him. People make the mistake of not thinking Donald Trump can be pushed to the wall because he's an irrational actor. He's an irrational actor because that has worked for him throughout his entire life. Dizzy Dean said famously, it always helps if the batter thinks you're a little crazy. Donald Trump is, I will say this, Donald Trump has convinced everybody he is crazy, and nobody will push him. Nobody will check him. The Republican Party won't keep him honest. Legislators won't keep him honest. Donors won't keep him honest. And because of that, the Republican Party's, I think the Republican Party's in for some very, very tough years ahead. I don't know that they survived Donald Trump. I think George W. Bush, when he privately told people that he might be the last Republican president elected, I think he may have been right. Donald Trump is a lifelong Democrat that became a Republican when he discovered birtherism and decided that he could exploit a faction of the Republican Party and win the nomination. So I think the Republicans have a lot of soul searching to do, and I wish them luck.
This is, in effect, the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum in Washington. That's something that's part of the Kennedy School. And at one point, Mr. Gorbachev was there after he was president of Russia, the Soviet Union. And he was asked by a student at the Kennedy School at the time, how would history be different if Nikita Khrushchev had been assassinated in November of 1963 and not John Kennedy? And without missing a beat, Mr. Gorbachev said, well, you can't really tell how history would change over a 30-year period, but one thing I can say for certain is Aristotle Onassis would not have married Mrs. Khrushchev. Now, so my final question to you is how would history be different? How will history be different because of Morning Joe show?
I'm sorry.
How will history be better off and the world be better off because of what you've done?
Okay, don't answer that. Yeah, we're not that important, honestly.
Well, you must be, you're influencing people, so you must have some influence.
What? If we are, that's great. We try every day.
I tell you what we'd like to see. We would like to see, and I thank Mika for yielding the floor to me at this point. We'd actually like to see more shows do what we do. And I will tell you, we have made NBC and MSNBC a lot of money. A lot of money. And I'm curious as to why more networks aren't allowing their hosts to talk for 15 minutes on Syria, talk for 15 minutes about veterans, talk, because we literally look at the newspapers. Alex Corson comes in before the show, said, what do you want to talk about? And we talk policy. When Morning Joe started, there was a shrinking news hole. And everybody told us that. You're going to have to talk more about Lindsay Lohan. You're going to have to talk more about Paris Hilton. You're going to need to talk more about this, that, the other. And we blew that wide open and would have 15-minute interviews. Dr. Brzezinski, when we were thinking about going to CBS, that's one of the things Dr. Brzezinski said. Well, if you can't talk for 15 minutes on Syria, you don't need to go to CBS.
And I like the transparency that we bring to the table. I mean, you know that I'm a Democrat. You now know that Joe's an independent and was a Republican. And you know our backgrounds, and you know our worldviews, and you know what shaped our thinking. And I think that is important to be very transparent about. I think that we're in a whole new world out there in the media, and you have to be as honest and transparent as you can.
Well, I want to thank you for the show that entertains so many people and gives so much good information to people every morning. And I want to thank you for being a fellow of the Institute of Politics, and thank you for coming here this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you.